tuning in. So I guess update number 6, hopefully they're not getting tedious, but as we move through we can see that every day things are changing, and every day we're being given a different piece of information from somebody, whether it be a politician or somebody in the media or somebody in medicine, and it can be very hard to tell what's truth and what's not, what's accurate and what's not. So what we're going to start with today is looking at what's happened over the last week. And very excitingly for South Australia, only 6 new cases from Saturday to Saturday. And you can see in the bottom half of the chart there that across Australia there's been a bit more than that, but it has certainly slowed down. And the chart that I've had up every other week showing a flattening curve, I decided the curve was nice and flat, and it was actually much nicer today to show you some daily cases. And you can see that over the last week, it actually averaged out at 41 new cases per day. And the week before that, it averaged out at 107. So we've certainly done a very good job, and thank you to everyone for your part in this, in decreasing how many new cases we're seeing. So I guess the question I was asking last week, we were talking a lot about flattening a curve. So it's now flat enough. And that then brings in a second question, which we've heard in the media this week. How do we keep it flat? How do we keep control? And when can we go back to normal? And there's been a lot of questions asked about this, and people are starting to talk about options and things we might do. And I guess the reason I've put this other chart up here today is if you look at the blue colour, that's Singapore, and they were being put forward a couple of weeks ago as the golden child of the world for their capacity to control this virus. And you can see that their line's no longer flat. Japan likewise had reasonably good control on their lines, not as good as it was. Sweden tried not putting in place lockdowns and those sort of words and encouraged their people to do the right thing and to stay apart from each other. And their system in the next week's going to be in trouble. So when we look at this chart, we can see the US is right up the top. I've left out some of the countries so it's not too busy. But you can see Australia's curve there is nice and flat. But we need to be very careful that we make sure it stays flat. We've also heard a little bit of difference in the end game. Last week I put forward up 3 end games. A vaccine, 60% of people having it, or is getting a reliable treatment. Well, there's a little bit of talk about this eradication word. And I'm not sure whether that's realistic or not realistic. I think most of the doctors you speak to and most of the scientists would actually say it's not realistic, but it's there as something that certainly for an island nation like Australia we can think about. And I guess for us as a small area of Australia and South Australia, if our borders are closed and we get control of all the people in our state with the disease, then that's possible. But as a connected world, I'm not sure that's quite as simple as that. So okay, if we've added in a step 4 possibility for what the end game is, last week's slide for the plan was physical distancing, cough and hygiene etiquette and making sure you don't touch your face, and we were talking about staying home unless you absolutely had to go out. And I've rather facetiously put a cross across that because that doesn't change yet. It might change. And if you listen to Scott Morrison's speech about in a month's time they might change some of the lockdown criteria, he wasn't saying things would go back to normal. He was talking about the fact that if things stay like this, then we can actually let people move around carefully and safely a little bit more. But it's still up to all of us as to whether that happens or doesn't happen, because it's possible for all of us to decide that it's not important to stay apart from each other and to be less careful, and then our curve doesn't stay flat. So for Darren's tip number 6 is don't be complacent. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So hopefully these pictures are big enough for you to see that for the one with the steeper cliff and the person on the edge, the other 2 people are walking away from the edge. And if you have a look at the one with a whole pile of groups of people, some sitting, some standing, and one person right on the edge, if you thought about that as the different countries of the world, and some countries are putting in place measures to stay as far away from that edge as possible, and some are happy to skate really close to the edge. And I guess for Australia, our leaders have to make that decision. But for each of us individually, we've got a role in that, in making sure that we don't get complacent. And there's two parts to this for us as Christians. We can become complacent about our spiritual life as well. And then we're walking up to a different cliff. So there's two things for us to be aware of to make sure that we remember this scripture, that therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Thank you very much.